We have so much to talk about. I definitely had my mouth on the floor. I was on like just a bunch of different emotions doing my research about you. And it's really inspiring that you're standing and positive and here today, and that you're so willing and open to be on my podcast with me and to talk about your journey. So thank you for being here.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me.
I would love if you can talk a little bit about your childhood and how you were raised. I want to sort of set the stage for the listeners and viewers out there.
So I was born third generation into the Children of God. So my grandfather joined this cult in the 70s. And the Children of God is one of these cults that came out of the late 60s, early 70s, had a lot to do with blowback from the civil rights movement. We just had a lot of cults popping up at that time. So my grandfather joined in the 70s. My mom was one of the first children born in.
Wow.
And by the time she's 14, she is pregnant by my grandfather's boss, who's the senior finance guy.
Mm-hmm.
My father is older than my grandfather. So then I was born in the Philippines because this cult went international in pretty much after Manson, and, you know, stuff started getting a bad name.
Right.
And so he got a revelation from God to go spread love around the world.
Got it.
When I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, we were 10,000 people living in communes all around the world.
10,000 people is so many people.
Many.
Okay.
And David Berg actually was just kind of a better cult leader than other cult leaders. So what he did was he showed up and he collected a bunch of other cults into his cult.
Wow.
And so built a giant cult very fast. And the Children of God was always good at performing. So they used music as a tool. You know, you throw a music festival in Huntington Beach, get a bunch of interesting people. People don't realize they're being brainwashed when they're at a music festival, right?
Right.
They believe they're having a religious experience. And you had so many young people that were just so passionate about this. And they did a really good job passing us off as just this, right? A missionary group with all these young, cute children who love Jesus and sing and perform. So sort of, you know, Von Trapp family singers, but for Jesus.
Yeah.
And so I was born in the Philippines, lived in Japan, Peru, and then a decade in Brazil.
Oh,
so
wow.
like most of what I remember is growing up in Brazil and then Mexico as a child. And we were completely cut off from the world. In that, you know, we had no music from the outside world. We had barely any movies. We had no books. The only things we were allowed to read was the King James Bible and the stuff that our leader wrote. And that was just our life, you know, the kids.
So no school, nothing
We
like
were
that.
technically homeschooled.
Okay.
But like the belief was that Jesus is coming back any day. So why do we need to waste our time with school?
Got it.
So I would say, you know, they focused a lot on teaching us to read and speak and perform in public because, you know, performance is really brilliant for trafficking children because when you see these shiny, smiley, dancing children, you don't think, you know, are they getting paid? Are they being abused?
Right.
Are they happy to be there?
Right.
And of course, you know, unfortunately, the Children of God is the cult that is famous for sexual abuse. You know, he started in the 70s using the women who joined the cult as religious prostitutes. He called them flirty fishing. And it was, you know, a very culty thing to do was take this verse from the Bible where he says, I will make you fishers of men. And he said,
Right.
go out and fish men.
Wow.
And then it got, you know, kind of heated up for the Children of God in the 80s in Time magazine as a sex cult with this, like, I call it a harem photo, you know, old dude, 13 scantily clad women. And that name became very synonymous with bad stuff and cults.
Right.
So they rebranded and they did a pretty good job. They called themselves the Family International. And by the 90s, they were performing twice in the White House.
No, they were not.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a crazy rebrand.
Yeah. And so they just sort of switched from prostitution to performance, you know, entertainment.
Right.
And so, you know, it's interesting when I watched The Quiet on Set documentary about kids growing up in
Right.
Hollywood. I was like, oh, we were just the poorest, most abused end of this.
Oof. That's really, really sad.
And the weird thing about the Children of God for being such an obvious cult was it wasn't like with the polygamous Mormons where we were shut away and never saw the world. We were trafficked in
Right.
front of the whole world.
And you guys were doing a lot of street performances and that kind of thing.
And this is what Joaquin and River Phoenix and Rose McGowan were sort of a part of growing up. It was
Which
like
is
street performing.
crazy. From what I've hear or know about cults, and I don't know if it's accurate, you are cut off from the outside world. Like, how do you manage 10,000 people from not going to say something?
So I think what people misunderstand about brainwashing the most is all brainwashing is getting you to not question, right? It's getting you to just not go there. And so isolation doesn't have to be completely on a commune, never seeing the world.
Right.
You know, and actually I think the Mormons taught us a lot about this, where like you can appear to be participating in the world, but you're like insulated from it.
And as a child, do you remember if you enjoyed those moments? Like performing and being out of the commune?
I really did. And I always say like the only thing that's more theater kids than theater kids is evangelical performing kids. And I think that it's because we were so controlled all of the time. You know, what I say about life growing up in the Children of God, everyone focuses on the sexual abuse and the belief in pedophilia. But what I say like was the worst abuse was just no spontaneous moments of joy. You know, we were essentially soldiers growing up in the army of God. But I was a very good performer. And so when I got on the stage, I could be larger than life and loud and dance and those kinds of things. So I really enjoyed it. And I feel very lucky that I got to grow up in Latin America. Like if I had to be born in one of the world's worst cults, I'm glad I got to grow up in Brazil and get all of that beautiful culture from it and not just like Ohio or Utah.
That is a beautiful perspective. So when did you realize that, okay, this either one isn't normal? I don't know if you had the wherewithal to know this is an exact cult, but like when did you start realizing, okay, this isn't normal?
Very, very young. You know, I remember being 6 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I spent a lot of time in like isolation's not even the correct word, like solitary confinement, just for being a bad kid, which is to say a kid. And so in almost all cults, you will start to see like iron-fisted control of children because they have to. And I always say like one of the warning signs of kids is when you see like all the kids in a row like that and they're just perfectly behaved.
Right.
You know, you see that in the FBI's investigation of Waco. The
Pretty
kids, you know, and they're like, these kids are so well behaved, 3 and 4-year-olds that sit for 4 hours in the middle of the night.
That's not normal.
That's not normal.
No.
That's comes from abuse
That's
and
not normal.
fear.
That's horrible. Do you wonder, or maybe your mom did, do you wonder why your mom didn't have the same questioning?
I mean, I wondered that a lot as a teenager, but I just think that she grew up in that exact same environment, you know, and I say about my mom, like she tried to teach us the lessons she learned in a little bit of a kinder way, you know, and a little bit more protective. And, you know, the Children of God was extremely about corporal punishment, but she never let us older kids discipline the younger kids, for example, you know. So she like saved me from that specific kind of trauma.
Right.
But also she was just such a true believer, you know. So once I started telling my story was when she found out that one of my main abusers, who was a very famous person, was also someone who had abused her as a child. Wow. But because the rules had changed and the rebrand had happened and we didn't do that stuff anymore, she just never questioned it. Like she never questioned whether her own children were at risk.
No way. Because even though it's just a rebrand, I didn't know that inside the cult, that was believable. But I would think that people within would be like, what a crock.
I mean, you would think, but
Wow.
I think this is the problem for me when cults rebrand. And this very specific type of rebrand, which we also see with the Mormons and their belief in polygamy, which was, we can't do it because of the outside world, right? So it wasn't the prophet was wrong. You know, so the prophet very specifically was like, when girls get their periods, which as we're talking about is younger and younger all the time, like that's when God intends for them to be sexually active and to start having babies.
That's crazy.
And they quickly realized, actually, when I was born, that, well, if you have a bunch of 14, 15-year-old, 13-year-old girls running around with babies, it's like that's proof of abuse. So we got to be more careful. So they made the rule 16, right? But what you did back then, you know, and to my mom specifically was given this, like when you got pregnant from an older man, that wasn't wrong because that was allowed back then.
That is so, so sad and so hard. This is where your mom was growing up. This was her whole existence in life. I don't even understand how someone would feel from, like, as a mother on the inside, that war within themselves. That has to be really, really hard.
And, you know, ultimately, I think she had that war going on in her much more than even she realized. You know, I think she was trying to be a true believer her whole life. But when I, at 15, you know, so I was always a problem kid, right, within the cult, which is just to say, again, outgoing, kind of noisy, creative.
Normal, yes.
A normal, rambunctious child with ADHD.
Yeah.
And so I was always in trouble, always in trouble. I mean, one of the reasons I think I'm always knitting is because I just have so much terror of being alone with nothing to do, because that was, you know, they use solitary confinement a lot as a punishment.
But you started knitting at a really young age.
Yeah, she taught me how to knit when I was 5.
And that is like your soothing mechanism?
Yes, it is absolutely my stim. It keeps me calm. It, you know, I've knit through my entire life, through 2 times to war.
No, it's quite fascinating to see you haven't looked down one time. It's amazing.